A lot of people would ask, why would I decide to make a course based on mastering the off season? And I think it's the most important part of building and winning in the fall is understanding that there has to be a systematic approach to turning potential into performance. I say this a lot in the book. Championships are not won on the first Friday night of the season. They're built long before the stadium lights are turned on. And there's a secret weapon to that, and that's the off season. It's where the foundations are laid. It's where the habits are formed. And a lot of younger coaches don't understand that process. So if you get an opportunity to look at a course like this or study with an older guy who's been really successful, you'll see how important the off season is. There's a holistic growth to this. Your programs need to build resiliency. They need to build leadership and accountability. And those things have to be taught. Those things are not, they just don't show up. If you're not doing something to build leadership, build accountability, you're setting yourself up for failure. There's more to it than just lifting. So I think that's important. And then being transformational, turning raw talent into reliable performance and making individuals want to work with each other. So that's the purpose of this course. We're going to go through aspect by aspect. I've got some sample stuff for you to look at. That you can download and just kind of get some ideas. I mean, I don't claim to be an expert on a lot of these things. These are just things that I've done. But one of the things I was smart enough to do was surround myself with people who were way smarter than me and things that I didn't understand. So I wasn't a great weight room guy, but I had great weight room guys around me, so on and so forth. So as a head coach or a new head coach, that's the most important thing. Hire people who are good at the things that you're not good at. Thanks for picking up the course. Let's jump into chapter 1. All right, Coach, let's jump into chapter 1, building a championship program. Obviously, that's everybody's goal when they get into coaching is they want to have a successful program and one that wins championships and, not only for personal goals, but for the children and the community and the athletes and everybody else. There's nothing more special than watching kids play on the hill behind the stadium and then 7 or 8 years later, that kid's coming out for JV football and talks about how he used to come to the games when he was little and saw, so-and-so play. And now that's all he wanted to do was be that person. And that's what championship programs do. And over the past few years, I've had opportunities to kind of work at small schools and small, like one-town communities. And that's a whole nother thing. And if you ever get a chance to do that, I would highly suggest it because it's just a different type of feelings to do that. But looking at building a championship program as we're mastering the offseason, I feel like there's 3 distinct things that you have to kind of focus on. The first one is establishing a clear vision. I think everybody has that coach speak about what they want to do, but how do you define success? Success has got to be defined past the scoreboard. You have to establish academic, character, and community goals that drive the program. These are things that keep the program going, every year. There's got to be a success matrix. What's your academic eligibility rate? What are your character development benchmarks? Whether that be 95%, know everybody to class on time or no discipline referrals, those kind of things. What's your graduation rate? How many of your kids are in credit recovery? How many of your kids can go to college if they want to? And what are some of the leadership roles beyond football? I mean, are your football players in SGA? Are they president of the FFA? Are they doing things? And, are you encouraging your athletes to be well-rounded? And I think that's something where some coaches slip and other coaches do a great job is, encouraging your players to be a part of the larger school community. I think is huge when you're building a championship program. And once again, like I was telling you, this course is kind of me outlining the book and different things. So if there's some other stuff that you want to read, there's a little bit more in the book than there is in the course per se. I'm going over the broad parts and giving you some examples and stuff like that, but the book has a lot more stuff in it. The second facet of building a championship program is that staff alignment. I think it's very, very important that your coaches understand what your philosophy is, understand the roles based on what they can do and what they can't do. And you need to assign your roles based on people's strengths and get each coach involved. I've seen guys who put their buddies in leadership positions and have high quality assistants on their staff who just are kind of dangling in the wind. You do yourself a disservice by that. Surround yourself with people who are better at things than you are. I think that's hugely important. But having your coaches understand, okay, this is what we do. This is how we are. These are the things that are important. I think is really, really important. I kind of witnessed that this past year and had to catch myself a few times. Everybody who knows anything about what I do, I'm a huge air raid guy. Well, I'm coaching in a double wing offense right now. And so, I would go into a coach's staff meeting and, they'd start talking about this, and this. And man, how hard it was for me not to say, hey, if we just ran 95 or if we did this or did that, that was one of those things. But where I was really valuable was when we went against spread teams, running the scout team, saying this is what I would do to attack us. And I think it made us a better team. So I found my niche. It also didn't hurt that I played college offensive line, so I understood blocking schemes and actually had a really, really good time. I think I'm going to do a video on the double wing here pretty soon. I think that would be pretty cool. It's way more similar to the air raid than I thought it would be, but getting that staff alignment, making sure everybody has a defined role, I think is hugely important as you're establishing the foundations to build a championship program. And then lastly would be that player buy-in. What are your team leaders in as far as goal setting and those kind of things? Having your players have a sense of ownership and accountability. You'll see the motivation skyrocket in your program. One of the things we're going to talk about later in the course is developing leadership and accountability and that player piece. Moving yourself from a coach-led program to a player-led program is that next step into building championships. So that's kind of what chapter 1 of the book talks about, is building that championship program. These are those 3 kind of, hallmarks that you want to look at. Like I said, you need to have matrix, the measurables to be able to look at certain things. Also, you want to start looking at systems over individuals. And I know that's kind of like, oh my God. Can you not, that one person who wants you to change the offense every other year, but you want your program to outlast players. Have your drills, your schemes, and your standards, have your playbooks and everything that transfer knowledge across graduating class, so you can build some sustainability through a repeatable process, create that tradition. I think that's really, really important. And then your program, if it's going to be championship level, really has to develop that total athlete, physical ability, football IQ, mental toughness, leadership. These are all things that you got to pour into your players, especially in the offseason. And this is where you have to have a definitive plan on how to do those things. And hopefully through this course, I can give you some ideas on how to do that so that you can address these multiple dimensions of growth and not just X's and O's. All right, Coach, as we move into chapter 2, we're going to look at the broad off-season blueprint. And what we like to do is break down the offseason kind of into 4 different phases. And I think if you can do that, it helps you kind of get an idea of where you're going and how you're going to get there. And some of these phases actually overlap, so it's not like you do one and then the other. I mean, there is some chronological tendencies to it, but a lot of that stuff will overlap. Like phase 4 will move into phase 2, and then phase 3 and 2 can be going at the same time, so on and so forth. So the offseason blueprint, obviously we're looking at recovery and assessment in phase 1, putting the season to bed, having some kind of ceremony where the juniors become seniors, those kind of things, selecting your leadership council, that kind of stuff is kind of important. You want to kind of put last season to bed, do your postseason review. I like to have each one of my position coaches, when I'm a head coach, take a certain aspect of the offense and the defense and kind of do a deep dive. What was our average per play on each play, those kind of things, jumping into your huddle and doing some reports and running some reports, creating clips. Season clips are always important. I used to do it by play. So like I would take all of my powers, create a clip, download it, and put it in a folder, because you guys know that Huddle and a lot of the video systems charge you for storage. So, trying to hold 3 and 4 and 5 seasons in there is kind of a thing. So, just kind of do that. And then you can upload it into different programs. Like the one that I like to use on YouTube is Just Play, where you can have clips put up there and you can get your good clips, your bad clips, put it in there with your diagrams and use those kind of things. If you've seen any of my other courses, you'll see that I use that quite a bit. But that postseason review analysis, your inventory, these kind of things are great. I talk about this on the YouTube channel a lot of times. Being prepared for that postseason meeting with your principal, how important that is to have the wealth of knowledge when you walk in there to be able to ask for what you need, defend what you need to defend, so on and so forth. Looking at your injury situation, whose injuries are going to go across the off season. Hopefully, a lot of us have certified athletic trainers now. Even me at a very small rural school, we have a certified athletic trainer on staff. That's one thing I have to give a lot of the school districts, credit for. They're starting to see the importance of having a guy there all day. Our guy comes in at 1:00. So he comes in at 1:00 and he stays till 8. Works with all sports, so that's pretty cool. And then kind of doing that SWOT analysis. What are your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, and your threats to growth. What are the things you did well? What are the things you didn't do well? What are some opportunities for improvement? Can you go to you got a guy that wants to come work, a new coach to bring in, those kind of things. Update facilities, all that kind of stuff. Working with your booster club. And then what are some threats? What are some things that are hurting? Can you make it through another year without bumper plates? The little things that a lot of people don't understand, being a big thing. And then you're going to move into your phase 2, which is your strength base, your foundational lifting, your general fitness, and your core stability. And this is where you really want to have a guy or woman. It just depends. One of the best strength and conditioning ladies I know, Melanie Red. I did some stuff with her when I first started off with Coach Tube. Amazing strength and conditioning coach out in the Midwest. But having somebody who actually knows what they're doing in the weight room is really, really important. A lot of schools are still old school. The head football coach is the football guy, so he's in the weight room and, they're just doing things. But if you don't, create a plan. I mean, I've got a sample plan that's very similar to what we've used a long time. I've been very fortunate over the years to have some weight room guys and higher weight room guys. I really think the weight room guy is the second most important guy on your staff behind your offensive line coach. And if he's one and the same, you really hit a home run. But those two guys, if they're elite, you got a chance to be very, very successful. But you'll see later on in the program, I have some periodizations, 16-week periodizations and different types like things like that, a 4-day work week and those kind of things. And we'll show you some examples of things that you can do in the strength-based phase. You're working on your general fitness and core stability. And that goes back to phase 1 is look at your injuries. What kind of injuries you had. I can remember one year we had a ton of shoulder injuries for whatever reason. And so that spring we adjusted what we did in the weight room. We added a lot of shoulder auxiliary lifts and those injuries went way, way, way down. So looking at your injuries, a lot of that can be addressed with your weight room, which is really, really important. You want to look at your cycle, divide your calendar into measurable phases with specific examples. You got your postseason or 2 to 3 weeks for recovery and evaluation. Then you're going to do 4 to 6 weeks, maybe of foundational work, strength base and general fitness, and then development for 6 to 8 weeks where you're doing power, speed, and skill refinement. And then you want to peak for 3 to 4 weeks. And then you're ready for like maximum readiness before the season. So that's really important. You want each one of your kids to settle, to set individual goals, strength benchmarks. I want to get to this squat, this bench, this clean. I want to work on this speed time. Whether it's 40 shuttle, those kind of things. Then have some team goals, attendance targets for lifting. A lot of us are lucky enough to have everybody in class during the day. If you're down in Texas, you got those athletic periods and things like that. But some of us just don't have that. So after school lifting is really, really important. Here's one thing that I used to really think about and never really did it until later in my career, but having a collective strength improvement goal. Hey, we want to improve by 1,000 pounds, whatever it is. And then, just, have some different types of things on those kind of things. Phase 3 would be skill and speed, position-specific work, agility work. That's stuff that you're doing in your off-season, spring ball, those kind of things. If you don't have legitimate spring ball like we don't have in North Carolina, these are your These are your workout phases. We get 10 days to do certain things. So, developing certain skills, testing, different routes and things, or maybe, different run schemes that you've kind of picked up in the off season, I think are really important during this time. And then lastly, that fourth phase, which is your mental and leadership phase. This is where you want to start looking at film, leadership councils, and football IQ, and we'll get into that later when we talk about our leadership program and how we work from being a coach led program to a player led program. And there are things that you can do to increase the likelihood that that happens. But I think that's important. And then the other thing is you got to realize that balance is non-negotiable. Physical development without mental preparation just creates an athlete who can't think. Strength without mobility creates injuries. You want to put everything together. If you want to lift, you want to run, you want to do agilities, those kind of things. And then lastly, I would just do this. I don't know where a lot of you guys stand on this, but I just encourage my kids to play as many sports as possible. There's no substitute for competition. You can't simulate it, and just being around teams and those kind of things. And I just enjoy going to watch my kids play other sports and see how they react. Especially, let's say you got a young kid that's a JV. He's a basketball player now, but he's going to be your quarterback. You think he's going to be your quarterback, and then you go to a basketball game and you see how he reacts to certain things. And if he's not mentally tough and you see him crumbling on the basketball court, then maybe he might not be that guy, or vice versa. He just handles things really well and you're like, yo, this kid has it. These are things that you get by incorporating multiple sports and doing different things like that. So this is kind of your big blueprint. As we move through the course, we're going to look at each phase and parts of each phase and talk about them more in depth. All right, Coach. So as we move into chapter 3 of the course slash book, we talk about strength, speed, and conditioning. Which obviously, when you start talking about the off season, this is what people really focus on. They think that this is what the off season is about. Which, I mean, to be fair, it's a large part of the off season process. Is building strength, speed, and conditioning. Um, a lot of that's going to be decided on how many of your players are multi-sport athletes. Over my years, I always, guys that played basketball hated to lift on game day and things like that. And baseball players the same way. And, it'd be interesting to have a round table to see how people address those issues, because I know that's a commonality across, the football community. But, really just looking at, how you structure your program. I'm just going to kind of give you an idea of what we've done over the years, and I'm pretty sure there's guys right now who are way smarter at this than us. But we kind of have 4 parts to our strength program. We want to focus on our compound lifts, our squats, deadlifts to some extent, and cleans. I talked to a guy that played for several state championships one time, and he said, we know how good we are by how many guys we have that clean 250. He said, the year we won a state championship, we had 26 guys cleaning 250, so we knew we were going to be good. And that's such a great metric, the power clean, whether you hang or pull from the floor. That's not something that I'm willing to debate. Either one is good, is fine with me. But we're definitely going to be a compound lift team. We're working on, speed mechanics, especially if you got a good track guy, learning proper mechanics, not driving across your body, but, with your angles and things like that. We're trying to teach them not just to run fast, but to run efficient. Obviously, working on core stability. If people don't understand how important core stability is for injury prevention, we want to do mobility and posterior chain work to keep athletes healthy. Those hamstring and large muscle injuries can really be addressed if we'll just, be smart in the weight room. And then obviously mental toughness. The weight room teaches toughness. There's physical barriers. One of the things that I do, and I talked about this on a YouTube podcast today. When I was in the weight room, if you had 6 reps and you got stuck at 5, we were going to take weight off and you were going to get that sixth. You were going to learn to fight through it no matter how hard it was. And I think that's really, really important. Obviously we want to master those lifts. Technique is way more important than load. If you're perfect at 60%, that's better than being sloppy at 80. We're definitely going to do a periodization type thing. We're going to start with volume and progress to intensity. Like we talked about before, speed is a skill. Things like A skip, B skips, and wall drills and wickets to develop proper form before max effort sprints are important. Um, Ground contact is very important. Arm drive and posture. And if you don't know what these things are, and I'm not an expert of those kind of things, but these are things that I've learned over the years. Google it. You jump into AI, find some videos, learn about these things, go to some courses on CoachTube or other places and learn these things. If you want to be an exceptional football coach, you got to learn things that are outside your comfort zone. We want to do some kind of dynamic warm up every session. Ankle and hip mobility is very, very important, especially for your linemen. I know as a college guy, we looked at flexibility in ankles and hips as far as who we were going to look at. Looking at hamstrings and glutes to reduce injuries, especially in the ACL. Core stability prevents back injuries. Recovery strategies, whether that's foam, talking to your kids about hydration, and sleep education. Getting sleep is very, very important. These are things that you want to look at. And so let me jump in over here real quick. I'm going to pull up a couple of samples. I'm going to pull up a sample 4-day workout and kind of show you what we do. And then we'll look at a periodization chart. Here's kind of what we do in our 4-day workout. We're gonna once again we're gonna emphasize strength and explosive power, speed mechanics. We're doing 4 days a week. One of those days we're either doing team building. That's when we work on our leadership academy, or we're doing games or some kind of team building activity. But basically we're in a 90-minute period at our school. So we want to do warm-ups, lifting, plyos, and speed drills to kind of fit into a 75-minute session, 60 to 90 seconds for in between lifts, 30 to 60 seconds before plyometrics and speed drills. And of course, obviously, we're going to look at, technique over load. So kind of here's our day one. It's a lower body power and acceleration day. Dynamic stretches, walking lunges, high knees, butt kicks, those kind of things. Lateral lunges, that kind of stuff. Body weight squats times 15. Back squats, Romanian deadlifts, walking lunges with dumbbells, box jumps, broad jumps. Then we're going to do some sprints, usually in the gym. If you have a larger class, you can kind of split it up, 30 minutes in the gym, 60 minutes or 45 minutes in the weight room and flip, that kind of stuff. So that's kind of what we look at as far as that's concerned. It's a thing. And so then, obviously we're going to go into our day two is our upper body strength and explosiveness. So we're going to do our shoulder warm up, pull aparts, face pull ups, those kind of things, push ups, medicine ball, chest pass, those kind of things, bench press, incline dumbbells, a lot of dumbbell work for shoulders and things like that, pull ups, push press, medicine ball, overhead toss, looking at some resisted sprints, lateral bounds, those kind of things. And any of those explosive mechanics that you can work on, we want to try to throw it. And once again, this is just kind of an example workout of some things that we've done in the past. And if you got a good weight room guy, just trust him. It's the structure more than the substance as far as this is concerned. There's no wrong way to skin a cat in this deal. Day three, we're going to do lower body and lateral quickness. So we're going to do walking lunges again, high knees, karaoke, hip openers. A lot of times I like to use the track hurdle, going over and under the hurdles, on those kind of deals. Deadlift, front squat, step ups with dumbbells, single leg Romanians, depth jumps, all good. 3-cone drill, 5-10-5, lateral bounding, those kind of things. That's kind of sprint work. So that's kind of like day three. And then day four is kind of a full body power and speed day. We're going to do our dynamic stretching, shoulder band work, power hang clean, pull ups. And once again, I'm not going to debate whether you pull from the floor or you hang clean, whichever one is your preference is fine with me. Incline dumbbell again, broad jump, and then we're doing flying 20s, lateral drill, and all these kind of things. So these are all kind of just a sample week. Once again, we talk about technique overload, focusing on teaching young athletes correct lifting and sprinting. I think that's way more important, especially when you get your young guys in there. Having a rest period, especially if you're doing explosive lifts, progression, increasing weight, height for jumps, those kind of things. Integration. You can do these with position-specific skill sessions on non-lifting days. I mean, we did a lot of that when I was in college. We would have instead of plows, we would do position-specific stuff, O-line, D-line, that kind of stuff. And then, of course, injury prevention. You want to do that work in your warm-ups. All right, so now let's look at kind of our periodization thing. This is our 16-week off-season strength and conditioning calendar. You can kind of see how it has day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. And of course, all of these are downloadable in your course and the downloadable material so you can get a copy of what's going on. So week 1 and 3, we want to do anatomical prep and movement foundation. Week 4 to 7, strength and power base. Week 8 to 11, maximum power and speed. And then 12 to 16, we kind of want to get into our preseason peak. So we're running into spring ball and getting into our summer. So that's kind of what we're doing. And like I said, without jumping into each one of these things, it's kind of just each one goes through that 4-day week, and you're going to recycle that for 3 weeks at a time and see where we are with those things. And then there's obviously your legend of different types of stuff. But once again, all this stuff is downloadable at the end of the course. These are just examples of some of the things we do, but the idea is to have a periodization, have different phases, and then break your workouts up so you're really being efficient when it comes to developing your strength and your speed program. And I think that's hugely important, especially when you start looking at your injury trends and adjusting your weightlifting program to address those deficiencies. All right, Coach, let's jump into chapter 4 and look at skills and techniques. I think this is kind of an overlap chapter. It overlaps into several different areas, but I really think when you can find time to work on individual skills and techniques, that's anytime you can steal technique or fundamental work, I think you're winning the off season. I go back to some of the books that I've read as a coach. And if you're not reading books from different areas, man, I think you're really selling yourself short. But one of them was the principles of the Navy SEALs. And one of the things that the SEALs talk about is that when things get hard, revert back to your fundamentals. And I talk to, quarterbacks about that in particular. Hey, look, man, don't try to do too much, stick with what we're good at. Don't try to overdo it. Just go back to your basic, take your drop, you read your grass, throw the ball in the grass and keep it moving. And I think skills and technique work is where you want to do that because, technique wins when talent is equal. And that's kind of what you're looking for. I mean, everybody wants to win the ones they're supposed to win, but, championship programs are the ones who win the ones they're not supposed to win. And that's when fundamentals kick in. The off season is going to allow you to have those high repetition, low pressure skill acquisition periods. If you're fortunate enough to have, athletic period where you have all your coaches around and you can do that work, especially if you have that 4-day workout that we talked about in chapter 3, where, you have that one day, one day it could be, one group could be doing leadership, the other group could be doing fundamentals, and you flip it back and forth. But anytime you can steal some skill work, position specific work, like I said, when I was in college, we would do that in the summertime. Sometimes instead of plyos, we would do position specific work, for each position group, whether it was linemen, we'd work on pulls and different things like that. And, DBs backpedaling and stuff like that. So anytime you can do those kind of things, that's really cool. I really think that the most important thing, though, is you have to plan those sessions. Be deliberate when you practice, man. Don't just go out there and make the day. I think that's part of this mastering the off season. The more you plan, the more you succeed. It's kind of that 5P kind of thing. But I just kind of say the more you plan, the more you succeed. To kind of look at those things and be deliberate. Sit down with your coach and staff and say, hey, these are the things we want to work on. Let's put a schedule together. Let's get a calendar and let's stick to it. I think the more you plan, and then share that with your kids. The more you plan, the better off you're going to be, and let the kids know, hey, this week we're doing man turn stuff, or we're doing zone turn stuff. If you're working with your DBs, and then, always, anytime in the off season you can do ladders and things like that, just to kind of add those to the mix. I think you're in good shape. once again, go back to this. I used to have a sign in our field house that said "Details win championships," and that's the little things that matter. Fundamentals are what wins. Every player has to master those proper stances, leverage principles, hand placement, footwork patterns. Like I said, when talent is equal, technique separates winners from losers. When I break down film, the first thing I do is I look at the offensive line, and I just look at the first formation, and I say, okay, look at those guys. And if the offensive line is very crisp, all the hats are equal, their spacing is perfect, then you're dealing with a coaching staff that pays attention with details. If one side's further up than the other, or there's a big bow in it, and it just kind of, the stances all look weird, then you know that they're not a detail-oriented staff, and then that could be your difference maker. Wide receivers, do they all have, the correct stances? Do they all look the same, or is one guy looking really lazy? And then when he gets the ball, his stance changes. These are things that you can teach your team to understand, and that's why paying attention to details and little fundamentals make a difference, because guys look at that. Oh, you got your elbows bent, your shoulders are over your knees. Oh, this dude's fixing to run a go route, and he thinks he's getting the ball. Whereas, oh, it's a screen to the other side, and he's just kind of chilling, relaxing. There's no intention about how he's lined up. These are things that detail-oriented coaches pay attention to. I go back to the How Mummy principle. He talks about the capacity for boredom. He got that from the guy from the Eagles. They talked about, they played the same song over and over and over and over. And, he's like, how do you do that? He's like, you got to have a great capacity for boredom. That's how you find that magic rep. You keep doing the same thing over and over and over until it's just like magic. Mastery requires 10,000 reps of proper technique. And, like I've said in many of my air raid courses, Bruce Lee said he would rather fight a dude who practiced 10,000 kicks one time than a dude to practice one kick 10,000 times. Your offensive offseason allows you controlled purposeful repetition. You don't have to worry about being tired. You don't have to worry about game pressure. So it allows you to do these little things that if you pay attention to the details and in your skill and technique sessions, whether it's a once a week after school session where guys just come in and it's you and the wide receivers or whatever you're doing, you can work on your position specific progressions. We all have these ideas of, hey, we're going to do fundamentals every day. We're going to do this every day. And then when fall practice runs around, your fundamental time goes way down because it's all about game prep and execution. So the off season is really, really important to progressing, those JV quarterbacks into varsity quarterbacks and varsity quarterbacks into all conference quarterbacks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Are you doing footwork? Getting your hips going. I have a hard time sometimes with quarterbacks and like, listen, dude, your feet have to follow your eyes. Leverage with linemen, back pedals, and just all kind of different things that you're working on in skills and techniques. And that's kind of what we talk about in chapter 4. And I think that you have to have a definitive plan to master that off season, get with your guys, have a progression plan in the off season to work. And even if you're just having the kids work on it by themselves, and some of us have these rules where we can't be around kids certain times of the year, dead periods. So here's an idea: have them film themselves. Get their accountability partner or their group, and you film your workouts and have them upload those workouts in the huddle or give them to you so you can look at them, give them feedback, and give it back to them. So if you can't be there in person, have them film those workouts, look at those things, and you'll be amazed at the level of improvement. Because once again, if you want to master the off season, the biggest thing is you got to be intentional about what you're doing, about what you're planning, and executing that plan to the best of your ability.